Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is we're turning to our discussions. There are two roving mics, and please speak clearly into the mic because we're recording. And firstly, your name, institution, and it's a statement or question, and we want to open to everyone. And debate. So I don't know where to start. Yes, the comrades were right there. And then I've noted you, and then right on that table. So we'll go in that order.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Wang. I'm a third-year student of international relations at UJ. I have a question for Professor Dong. Since the Trump administration is putting up trade wars and using protectionist measures to guard against their domestic economies, and they are moving away from the globalization model. You can see this throughout Europe as well, through nationalistic movements. They are against free movement of people, etc. So I wanted to ask the professor, do you think this would be the perfect moment for African states to delink from the global economy so that they build domestically and then reintegrate? Because the trade war between, well, the looming trade war between America and China, it's still gonna get worse, tit for tat. And then through this we see the liberalist culture that the West has put on us, such as free trade, no barriers to trade, but then that's what they are doing now to protect their domestic industries. So my question is, should we as African states now start delinking from the global economy so that we reintegrate and build domestic industries such as manufacturing, etc.? Thank you.
Thank you. Next to you, the next comrade.
Hi, my name is Cradle. I'm my name is Cradle. I'm from a movement called OPR. My question is more similar to his, but I just wanted to understand. I mean, last time you remember when we had the ambassador from China, and I asked him, what is China's interest in Africa? He said it was to help us develop, helping us build bridges and whatnot. But we all know that, what is underneath the ground of Africa is the interest for most of these outside countries. So I just want to understand from the gentlemen who are here, what is their interest in Africa, and also just looking at the fact that globalization is a negotiated thing, and we all know that in negotiation, the person with power is the person with money, and we do not have that money. So what have we negotiated with them? What are they getting out of Africa? Because really, like what he said, we would love to close our borders and try make our own things, build our own bridges. So why is China here? Yeah, why do we need them? Thank you.
Thank you. I've noted next one. I'll take one per table. Gentleman with the tie right there, and then the lady behind him. Hawa. And then I'll come right here. Professor.
Good afternoon. My name is Re-Globalisation. I'm a political analyst and I look quite very much into this Sino-Africa relations, and particularly also with the European Union since Britain has gotten out. Every minute and every hour, China changes. I know this because when I was in China, I lived there for quite a long time, I had a lot of questions that are still even being asked today. But at least I had a fortune of asking the questions from people that have the first-hand experience, our supervisors and so on. And the biggest question was with regards to China's record of human rights, on the human rights issue. I was quite insistent on this issue because it is one thing that the West particularly has about. Until my supervisor one day said, okay, your questions are very valid, but come with me, I would like to take you up the mountain. I said, okay, you're not going to learn about Confucius again. He was like, oh well, it's up to you to see what you want to see. So then we hiked up Jielu mountain in Hunan. And as we get to the summit of the mountain, he says, look there. And I said, yes, that's the city. He says, yes, that is the city. You see the whole skyline of over 7 million, housing over 7 million people in this village, keeping the lights on for that 7 million people, having transportation for 7 million people, having sufficient food for 7 million people, having cigarette and baijiu and everything else that they have. It is the work of the Chinese government. Now, so you judge that very same West that lambastes China for human rights abuses. What about the people that stay on the streets and live on the streets and literally have lost their humanity and the essence of their very frame of being? Are they not perhaps as guilty or even more guilty than us for human rights? So, the questions that we seek to find about China, I would highly recommend that take up the opportunities to go to China. You will see things that you will never see before. I had an opportunity of actually seeing some of the government's plans about a future, 2063 plans and all that. China is literally going into the 22nd century. You will see things you've never seen before that you never, in fact, thought you could.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
After having even traveled to the European Union and also England as well, and lived in England as well, I can confidently say that China is actually is beating those countries. So the demonization of it all, we need to have the first-hand experience in order for us to have.
Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
I must confess, he is not with Confucius Institute. Before you come to me and say, hey, your people are speaking, I met him for the first time today. Thank you. Next.
My name is Maureen Khan. I'm from the World Group and Habitat Trust. And my question and comment is directed to Professor Dong, and perhaps Professor Henry, do you want to add something? Using the two examples, referring to the two examples that Professor Dong made mention of, one was Costco and the other is Alibaba. Now, in terms of deglobalization, I would have liked to hear more reference to old economy versus new economy and the fourth industrial revolution and how that plays into deglobalization. And if I go back to Costco, which is an old economy, industry and model, being a logistics shipping company, the largest in the world, and its market cap actually being 1/40th the market cap of Alibaba, being an e-commerce, you can say logistics e-commerce business. So how does this, also in terms of, you've seen that Walmart bought Flipkart, etc. So how does all of this play into the Scrabble, and how does it contribute to deglobalization? Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have Professor Arthur Mtambara, and then I'll invite all speakers to most of these are comments and few questions, but let's allow more people to speak. But yeah, go ahead.
Mine is a comment, and they can respond if they wish to. Number one, the Africans must have their own strategy to the world. We can't just respond to the one belt, one road philosophy. That's the Chinese strategy to the world. What is the African response? What are the African strategies? So the Africans must have their own strategy to China and to the world. Number two, the Africans must work as a continent. 1.2 billion Africans, $2.3 trillion GDP. This idea of South Africa negotiating with China, Zimbabwe, we're too small. $300 billion GDP, 55 million people is chicken change. 1.2 billion people, $2.3 trillion, that's the way to go for the Africans. Third point, the African must now leverage elements of the fourth industrial revolution. Artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. Don't get too scared and think that these are the technologies for China, for Japan, for America. There's an opportunity to leapfrog. If you think about it in terms of wireless technologies, M-Pesa and EcoCash are global best practice. There's nothing in China, there's nothing in America that compares to EcoCash or M-Pesa. So there's potential for the African to leverage elements of the fourth industrial revolution. Last point, we go to Biko. Black man, you're on your own. Black woman, you're on your own. There is no way China, Japan, or America will help the African to beneficiate. There is no way China, America, or Europe will help us produce cars, produce computers. It's not in their interest. Black man, black woman, you're on your own. I think a comment on those.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think as you can see, we just marked 200th anniversary of Karl Marx. And I'm fascinated by the debates and listening to D-Link, a term that is used by the Dependencia School. Some of you are old enough or who have read more will understand that the Dependencia or the Latin American school that argued that for you to develop, you have to D-Link. So I'm fascinated to see old debates, and Sanusha used a term. What did you use? Yes. It is, Karl Marx was scared of one strata that is called the Lumpen proletariat. He was scared of it. That brought Hitler back to power in Germany. But it's interesting that we're now reliving history. We're back to some of those days way back in the 30s. Can I have, in the very same order, Don, would you like to start? And then Henry and then Sanusha. Please. And then we'll take another round. You can speak from there or here, your choice.
Okay. I think Wavia set up, I think, very excellent comments and questions. So we want to go there? Okay. I would try to, I think some of the questions, comments are actually very similar, so I'll try to combine them. And also, in the way I can also, to the extent I can, I'll try to respond to Naidoo's, I think, excellent comments as well. This idea, first of all, I'm very impressed with also your this statement, right? There's also a very similar thing in China. It's called like heaven helps those who help themselves. 天助自助者, or God helps those who help themselves. So I think one very important experience of China's development really is so-called self-reliance, and especially during the Cold War when China was sanctioned by the West, the United States, etc., and others. That's so number one. I fully agree with that. Number two, I wanted to, since I think the first gentleman of there mentioned this concept, whether or not South Africa should think about de-link from the global economy or globalization, and then you after through a period of internal development, and then you come back. I want to share with you one example, current experience of the sort of looming trade war between China and the United States. One very critical part of that story is the United States actually threatened, it's already to impose a sanction on the exports of the critical component of the microchips to China, which significantly negatively affected the ZTE, one of the largest sort of tech companies in China, its production. So basically, the company was forced to sort of stop operation because its supply chain was cut off by the United States. A lot of those microchips, they have to import it from the United States and then sort of assemble and produce a set of different products. And then that was one key thing in the demand or threats, the list of threats imposed by Trump on China. And that also triggered a very furious, sort of heated debate in China as to what strategy China should be taking in response to that. One is that we can call it a nativist sort of approach. People say, well, this is a wake-up call. Again, all this disillusion of globalization, this is all false. We have to wake up to that. And because at the end of the day, you have to have your own capability of producing all those key components, microchips. Otherwise, there will be a moment that your adversary, potential competitor, will point their gun at your head, and then you'll be done. So there are very strong voices arguing that China should develop its own independent sort of industry, microchips industry, and I think the top leaders also responded to that and making very similar sort of policy guidelines, etc. But also at the same time, there's also I will call it parallel voices going on. People who argue that yes, we should be devoting more resources trying to develop our own sort of microchips industry, but at the same time, remember the world economy, global economy has already been highly globalized. There's no way we can say we want to quit or sort of decouple ourselves from the global economy. So in another way, we can, I think, conceptualize this as shift gears, but while driving, because you can imagine global economic competition as everyone it's a car racing, right? We want to drive, then devise different strategy how to do this and that. But if you say, okay, I want to stop and try to do some maintenance and then or decouple, delink from the global economy for then everyone is racing ahead, right? So I think a better strategy probably will be shift gears and try to fix those problems while driving. So which means we are still in this broader context of globalization or re-globalization. That's what I'm arguing. But of course, that doesn't mean that then that we do not develop our very tailored strategy to suit our own domestic needs. In this case, China microchips industry, and we have to deal with that's a huge challenge for China. But I think that at the end of the day, I think my impression is that the best way to go is shift gears while driving, not delink from the global economy. There's no way we can, even for China, there's no way we can do that. But we can do better. So I think this is, I think perhaps what I want to say. Any other? Oh, another question I think from this lady, the comments on the distinction between the old economy and the new economy. I just want to make a very Costco versus Alibaba. I want to make a very quick comments here, then I will turn over to my colleagues here. Which is, I think, to think of, and particularly this is, think about how this re-globalization process or the Chinese companies like Alibaba can play a very important innovative role in that process is it is actually doing, think about what Alibaba is doing. It's actually empowering the small businesses around the globe. It's creating through the technologies like e-commerce, technology and platform, etc. It actually will be empowering a lot of business, very small business. They will be able to compete in this globalized age. And think about in the old, economy, version economy, you would have to rent a shop, and hire a lot of staff members to open even just a store, right? And that kind of physical presence and is a lot of gets into the operating cost. But what I think the fourth industry revolution, this internet, e-commerce, make it possible is that it can dramatically reduce all those kind of operating costs. Even just one, young people, young woman or man, they can start off doing online business, just using a laptop. And that's the only cost you will need to get into that global competition. And this is, I think, something that never happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that was sort of impossible for us to think about for individuals, for really, really small business to be able to compete in a global economy, in the globalization process. But now this is all has been made possible, I think, because of the progress development in the fourth industry revolution, and like leading companies like Alibaba and many others will be able to engage in innovations and create platforms, technology in such a way that will be empowering the small business to compete. I think this is, and as far as I sort of understand, also at the core of Jack Ma's, his sort of business strategy. I think that is very smart strategy. I think if he will be able to stick to that, I think he definitely would continue to lead his own company to also to leap up to the next level of global competition. So I'll probably stop here.
Henry, can you take over?
I think we have a very good audience group here. The questions is very tough. So with three here still hungry, empty stomach, my answer may be not so strong. Okay, first, sorry, I think the one sound. First, I'm glad that you mentioned about the trade war. To Trump, I think this is more media war. He will care less about the economic benefit, more about his political capital. Because of the 15 minutes limit, I didn't have a chance to elaborate about this point. Basically, I have 3 points about this. Why we don't call it a trade war, why in a sense it's a media war. First of all, if you look at the initial on March 22nd, the Trump imposed tariff on 50 billion US dollars Chinese export to US. That number in weight on US GDP, which is about 20 trillion, it comes about 0.25% of US GDP. In that kind of a ratio, I think Trump would care less about economic benefit for that reason. Secondly, Trump is under great pressure for domestic troubles. With all the media war going on, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, basically every day have some criticism on White House practice. So he has to fight this media war to gain approval rate. That's his political capital. He wants to get support from his citizens. So even in the White House, he's still fighting a permanent campaign war. That's the second point. Thirdly, internationally, he has to play the cards which can help his domestic approval rate. For instance, in one of his tweets, he mentioned he's going to play China card, North Korea card, and Syria's card same time. That's perfect example for Trump's practice on international political marketing. This term, I created this term, but I think it's being practiced every day, everywhere. It's just not studied systematically. So that's my 3 points why we call it media war. Secondly, in the trade war, basically it's lose-lose situation. Nobody will win. In the global economy, when you fight a trade war, you lose, I lose. But in the media war, it can be win-win because both sides of the war want to gain domestic support from its own citizens. It can be winning on the U.S. side, showing the U.S. Trump as a president's approval rate is going up. This is a fact. Even CNN's recent poll showed Trump is gaining ground on the approval rate. That works for him. That's why he will continue this negotiation. On the other side, media war can be win-win, and everybody wants to win. Nobody wants to lose face. So whether it's a real war going on for the trade or not, the media war is always going on. My last point is some of the Trump's action is hard to understand. One day his trade war is good. The other day he's very friendly, sending delegations, talking to President Xi Jinping because he sees this relationship going on. If we see the background of Trump, he's a shrewd businessman. His art of a deal makes him think, at least he claimed openly, saying, I am the best negotiator. So in this case, his goal for the country is making America great again. He will do whatever he can to negotiate with anybody, with Africa, with Europe, Asia, and South America also. So this is his background. He wants to do the trade negotiation. But as a businessman, he realized if fighting any trade war is not good for him. So I see his logic. He will not continue to fight on the tough trade war. He will need the benefit of political capital gain to win the midterm election, which help his Republican Party. If the Republicans lose the majority in the two houses, the Congress and Senate, the danger to Trump is immediately he can be impeached by the controlled Democratic House. So this is why he will fight so hard on the media war. Also related to that, whether he wants or not, if any re-election thought he has, that also he need to gain political ground. That's why he's fighting so hard on the media war. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take another round and feel free to, we just want as many people to speak as possible. That very same table, the one that I'm looking here first, and then I come right here, and the gentleman, that hand, any other hand? Yes, lady here, and there's a hidden hand behind. Yes, that will be the last one. Can we go in that order?
The name is Nkosi, an academic and a business person. I'd like to shift the focus slightly to the area of geopolitics. If it is correct that China's growth and development trajectory threatens a unipolar world dominated by the United States. I hope I'm correct, but the intellectuals will correct me if I'm wrong. Secondly, given the fact that there's fierce competition between the United States and Russia that we haven't talked about, how does China factor the instability that is created by the geopolitics between the US and the Russian Empire, if I could call it that? Because I think you have to take into account the old but also new contestation between the United States and Russia.
Yes. Number two, I think yes. Your name and question was taken.
Greetings to the city. My name is Tango, student here at the University of Johannesburg. It is interesting that you speak of myself, the point that I call is the 40s, which is decolonization, the other is dealing, the other is de-globalization, and de-commodification. So looking at the re-globalization and de-globalization, we take it 10 years back where there was economic meltdown, where financial algos engineered this economic meltdown, and from that we see a number of trade union parties strengthening the laws and regulation on trading between countries, such as South Africa and China relations, which we have seen in the past 20 years strengthened up to this day. So in that regard, the policies that have been formulated after the economic meltdown, which affected the world greatly, and then we see China has managed to proliferate from such economic meltdown and today to be the second largest economic giant in the world, but by also coming and exploiting what we are trying to now have a thought leadership and a decolonized curriculum and integrated Africa solution for China and South African relations going throughout the world. How does China want to see the relation going forward after 10 months back opening a development bank which we see 1.3 trillion invested in South Africa, and then our first and primary resources going directly to China, but us we are not benefiting in terms of skill development and also helping to gain from our economic development. So what is the plan in terms of skills and labor or skills direct exchange that will see that the marginalized 60% of South Africans benefiting greatly from such a trade, and how is the plan moving forward in the future in terms of the loss of trade? Thank you.
Yes, my brother, I hear you. Next, and then I come here, I go back there, and then I come here, and then just allow me to. So most of these are comments. Thank you.
Okay,
go ahead.
My name is Saeed. I'm from Phoenix TV from Hong Kong, based in Hong Kong, from Hong Kong. So I have two questions. The first one, what did Africa have to offer for re-globalization? Is the first question. The second one, what the benefit that can Africa take from the trade war between US and China? Thank you.
Thank you. The lady right here. Then I'm coming to back there, and then I'm coming right here.
Good day. On Monday...
Your name, please.
Sorry, my name is Natali Maboko. On Monday, the UJ debating had this motion. This House believes it is in China's interest to take the lead in subduing North Korea. So I was opposing this motion, saying it's not in China's interest, and I lost badly. Moreover, what I want to take from this is that the prop side argued that it is for China's interest in terms of geopolitics and leading, expanding. So I would like to get your stats on this. Do you believe that it's in China's interest to subdue North Korea in leading peace? And what's the best way, or why is China the best country to then do this?
I'm coming to that table. Yes, gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you, President Director, and thank you very much for this very, very thought-provoking session. My first just a comment and two simple questions. I think I like Professor Henry's illustration that the pictures there tells the story. I just thought of, we do PowerPoint presentations. There's a concept called death by bullet points from PowerPoint. You actually alluded that it's all in the pictures. I just have two questions for you. Prof. Henry, I'm going to put you on the spot to make a profound pronouncement. You've actually sort of hit and run. You've talked about the media war, but I want you to put your head on the block and do this. The one is the stormy war. I like the way you put it, left on your picture there. I'm not sure for those of our students here when you watch CNN, but the stormy war is the big thing. Is that lady that Prof. Trump, Trump was one, and the allegation is he had that affair just prior to the elections. If that has come out during the elections, it may have changed the landscape of the American elections. So my question to you, Prof. Henry, will the stormy issue hold, and will it gain traction towards possible impeachment, if at all possible? Secondly, the Mueller investigation. Trump is known to be doing the world's craziest things. We all know you can't predict what is going to happen next. And he's doing things completely. Politics, the game of politics has changed with the Trump era. So the Mueller investigation is out. There are talks that we will actually get rid of Mueller, and there are talks that that will be a constitutional, serious nightmare in the US.
Thank you.
I want you to put your head on the block.
Can I have the next hand next to you? There was another hand next to you.
I hope I can ask permission to sit because I'm trying to avoid to show you how short I am.
You can stand, there's no worry. You can stand, please, my sister.
No, don't stand me on the chair. I have two comments and one question. One comment is, I think it's as much as we can ask whether it's war on media or war on trade or whatever, we can also ask war for what? It used to be war for truth, for ideology, but increasingly it's really for attention, for affection to some extent. So we can ask war for what? War against what? The second comment is that, when I was, my name is Yuki, I'm an academic at UJ. When we talk about or hear about globalization, deglobalization, re-globalization, the question I ask myself is how much has it changed, really? Especially if you think back into the history, before America became the dominant force in the global political and economic space, they used to be protectionist. It was Britain who was pushing for the open policy, now that America was very much trying to protect themselves. So my point is that it seems to be that through our history, it's always the dominant player trying to push for open policies because they are all the way to gain, nothing to lose. And for everyone else, basically, we always kind of calculate our own interest, see how much we benefit, see how much we lose because of the globalization, and see how much bargaining power we have, more or less. So my question is then, how much has that changed now compared with that? But then also the question is, think of Africa. We are not at the center or the drive of this globalization force. We are not going to be there for a long time. So the question is what we can do differently this time compared with last time, that we didn't take full advantage of the whole globalization, whatever, to do it differently so we can take more advantage and to make it work for us, to be more proactive, to be more active, to really make this work for us. So that's my question.
Thank you. I'm coming right here. Is there any other hand? Oh, this will be the last one. Yes. Any other?
Thanks a lot, David, and thanks especially to the Confucius Institute, but also to all of the panelists. Really interesting inputs and very timely, I think. A quick question, and maybe there's a comment embedded within that, but I wanted to ask a question about the seemingly potentially contradictory nature of the two statements. The one is that we talk about an upgrading and an expansion of an existing operating system. And that's what inclusive re-globalization is about. But on the other hand, we also talk about shaping a new global world order. And I'm interested in understanding how we straddle what seems to be a difference in outlook between those things. If on the one hand we're talking about establishing a new global world order in which we have fundamentally different balance of power and in which nation states play a different role both individually and collectively. That sounds to me like something quite fundamentally different from just an upgrading of the existing system. And Sanusha's question about inequality and how we address some of the key challenges in developing countries is critical in understanding that, I think. The second question, which I think is related to the optics of the narrative, is also about if we're thinking that an inclusive re-globalization will create an economy in which the existing dominant economies find a space in which they can still pursue their own interests. Are we sure that we've properly understood the nature of the US economy? My concern with the nature of the US economy is that the connections between the military-industrial complex and the way the economy functions might suggest some barriers to entry if one is hoping that that economy is just going to become part of a new global economic order in which they are no longer the dominant force. Won't there be a backlash? Won't there be, as we've already begun to see, elements from within the economy that use the military prowess that the US has to slow down and destabilize the Chinese agenda? Isn't that part of the reality of what we can expect moving into the future as this world order begins to be reshaped or as the system begins to be upgraded? And what can we do now to prevent the destructive effect that that has? Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this time around, I'll start with Sanusha, and then I'll come this way. Henry, and then Professor Wang.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I think mine is just going to be inputs because there were more questions to the two speakers, but not to reiterate some of the stuff that was responded to earlier. But I think when you talk D-Link, I think you have to look at the D-Link argument in the complexities that we have in the global arena today. And how can you is there a possibility to D-Link in the way in which the economies of scale work and so forth? And some of us, I think, David raised a very valid point. I think it was the Latin American economists who raised the whole point about delinking, etc. I think it needs to be looked at systemically in terms of structural conditions, in terms of how economies are integrated, and how not just economies, but I think currencies work in the context of how currency fluctuation takes place as well. So I'm not saying it's not an argument to put out there, but I think we've got to sufficiently interrogate the structural conditions that exist in the global political arena and why we are sitting in this kind of space today where we're talking about re-globalization. The very point, the last point that Richard made about the contradictory nature of re-globalization or versus a global world order, because I think it comes back to this fundamental question of transformation versus reform. Are we transforming the system or are we reforming the system through upgrade and expansion? Because if we're reforming, we're not changing and we're not transforming anything. And that means the rules have to change, the nature of competitive advantage has to change, the actual dynamic of manufacturing has to change, incorporating what was said about how Africa has to look at the role it plays in taking advantage of the whole question of opportunities. And this is again part of the dilemma, I think, when you think about the challenge around what we see as economic integration and global value chains, and we have a whole lot of terminology thrown at us. about global value chains and how you have to be part of the global value chain, but it's a very basic of how we actually deal with that. So I think it's much more complex than what we think it is, but the point is that we have to find that mesh. On the question of, I think the China interest in Africa, that has been addressed, but I do think that since FOCAC has started, I'm still waiting to see an Africa strategy. I'm still waiting to see an AU consensus strategy around FOCAC. And I think this is my frustration, that is I haven't seen it. And we've been dealing and we've been writing and we've been researching, but we haven't seen it. And we keep asking the question, what is the strategy? Is it a continental one? Is it a regional one? Is it one that can bring some level of consensus? And hopefully these AU reforms that are coming into process now can actually develop some level of connectivity to the way in which Africa deals not just only with China, but with all its external partnerships. That includes both Europe, Asia, and Latin America, and North America. So I think we've got to be much more clear and coherent and open about the fact that there needs to be some strategy in terms of agency and so forth. On the question around what's the interest of war? What do we want with war? What's the interest? I think it's really about power and interest in the dynamics. I mean, what is the actual need for creating this dynamic? And it comes back to this point about the military-industrial complex as well. We talk about a US in retreat. We talk about, if you read Edward Lewis's book called Western Liberal Order in Retreat, there's a sense that this is a temporary phenomenon. It's not going to basically continue, that eventually the Western liberal order will still remain triumphant at some point. And I think this is the point about the narrative. The optics of the narrative is what we're trying to create. So if we're looking for fast fixes, we're not going to get it. There's no fast fix and fast solution. But I think what we are going to be seeing is how this question about geopolitics is being addressed. Where does China fit in the US-Russia tension? And I can tell you that China is keeping Russia very close. With the China-Russia agreement, in the context of, if you look at BRICS, I think there's a very interesting subgrouping of Russia, India, China in terms of the number of dynamics that are emerging around geopolitics. And I think China is also very clear about how the BRI can actually become quite an interesting dynamic for the way in which it expands across Eurasia and so forth. So I think in terms of how do they focus that in, I think they're very much aware of how these issues are playing out, and they're keeping this in the context of the Russia-China or the China-Russia engagement and so forth. I think you also have to look at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to see those dynamics play out. So in terms of US-Russia tensions, I think we're not looking at a unipolar world, we're looking at a multipolar world of many financial centers and other centers of power, but it's the uncertainty of that world and how that's playing out. One last point on the contradictory nature of re-globalization versus a new world order or global order. I think the challenge for us is, do we still want to see a country that comes in or a global actor that emerges to stabilize? And that's the real challenge. Or are we trying to ask ourselves, can it operate in a multipolarity of the international system where you can have multiple centers of power? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've been joined by our strategic partner, Nanjing Tech University president is here, is in the house, and his delegation. We're going to finish two of our guest speakers, 1 minute each, just to say concluding remarks, and I'm going to invite the president to give 5-7 minutes. And my co-director, Professor Peng, if you could come in front, you will do the translation. So we're going to go in that order. May I have Henry coming, please? 1-2 minutes, and then send Professor Wang. Thank you.
Thank you. Promise 1 minute. Especially about the hard bang on my head. The two questions, Stormy War and the Mueller investigation. I think this is a hitting point. That's why Trump wants to fight the media war, especially for his sake, avoiding by the Democrats to be impeached. So according to the CNN news, we can see Trump also happened to openly admit they paid Stormy for the $130,000 for keep her quiet. And the timing of that can be influenced on the US election in 2016, especially the funding of that money, silent money, where it's coming from, that's even more questionable. Second is about the Mueller investigation. I think FBI has all the resources to collect information, whether it's linked to Russia or not, but once investigation come out, it will be something linked to impeachment. That's why Trump feels so much about his media war instead of the trade war, because he won't win the midterm election for his party to avoid being impeached. Last question about the lady, she mentioned about the war for truth. I think that's a great point. Instead of war on trade, on media, there's always a truth out there. For this, we have a global issue, how to fight with the fake news. That's a global issue. We all have to fight with the technology or the strategy of Sun Tzu, art of media war. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I get into the 1 minute answer of the question, I really want to say that how much I'm grateful for today's event, because this is truly one of the most intellectually rigorous sort of engagement I've ever been to, especially the hard questions coming from the audience, and that I think helped us tremendously for my own thinking on my Re-Globalisation, and I'm sure also for Professor Henry Song's his media war thinking. And for that, I think we are, both of us are most grateful. Let me very quickly go to my 1 minute sort of answer. One thing keeps coming up, so I wanted to also get back to that in my final remarks, which is, I think reforms in many ways also transforming. Reform is, yes, it's not 100% the same as transformation, but in many ways I think reform in itself is also transformation. Take the example of China, for instance. In the past sort of 30 years of reforms and opening up, and 40 years of that experiences, China has reformed itself in a very dramatic, fundamental ways. But as a result, Chinese society and its relationship between China and the world has also been fundamentally transformed. So I think that our world is very complex place, and a lot of interactions, a lot of dynamics going on. So one thing I think I really wanted to take a slightly different view. I think reform, we do not need to really, contrast reform and transformation and sort of in a very rigid way. I would argue reform in itself is also a very significant way of transformation, and that is why I think, when I argue the Re-Globalisation is about upgrading, expansion of the old version of globalization process, but in itself is also about transformation. A lot of old rules will be negotiated and renegotiated, and a lot of new rules will be made, and a lot of bargaining will be going on, and hopefully, as I argue, at least the parameters that I put forward, this should be the sort of normative way in how legalization process should be going, and hopefully at the end of the day we will reach an equilibrium that we have a more inclusive, more balanced, and a more sort of beneficial legalization process for everyone. Also very quickly, maybe 20 seconds, I'll finish. But this is a very important question because we got a question from the audience. The gentleman asking what Africa can offer to the legalization process. Of course, I'm not an African specialist, therefore I will not pretend that I am. But I want to say that at least based on the Chinese experiences, for instance, every country we have to think about what our comparative advantage is in this global economic competition. And they are, economists, tell us a lot of important component, labor, capital, technology, etc. But I also want to add to that the China's experience is that a developmental policy is also very important. And of course, that I think what China is trying to offer, this BRI, is also an inclusive process in which what China is trying to seek is a win-win sort of situation. What we can bring to our friends and partners here on this continent, and how we together can address the deficiency in the old version of globalization, and how together we can create a new legalization process which is more inclusive, more balanced, and more beneficial for everyone. Thank you.